Welcome to the England Rugby Pod. Thanks for downloading episode 1. Today we look back at England's perfect year and see how they got on at the 2017 Six Nations Championship. You're listening to the England Rugby Pod, the rugby podcast that believes England will win the World Cup in 2019. Right, welcome to our very first proper episode of the England Rugby Pod. Dan is with us today. Dan, hi.
Good morning. Before we carry on, I think it's probably important I make a clarification, especially should my coach be listening. But following the introduction, I want to make clear that every single one of my injuries has been 100% genuine.
Of course.
Of course. I mean, torn cuticles are pretty serious injuries these days.
It's what I hear. It's what I hear. Okay, good. Well, on that note, we shall get cracking. So we're just going to do a bit of a roundup, really, aren't we? We're going to have a look at how they've been getting on since Eddie Jones took over. So I guess the obvious place to start is probably just at the just before the Eddie Jones era began, and that rather abysmal effort at the 2015 World Cup.
Yeah, it was disappointing to say the least. Surprising as well. I mean, I know both of us actually, but I know I for one went in with really high hopes of that World Cup, but it didn't materialise as expected. And with hindsight, you can understand why. I mean, that's not looking to put the blame on sort of Lancaster and his regime. It was a tough group, but equally there were clearly faults within the setup, within the team.
Yeah, it was as you say, it was disappointing. We probably had false hope, didn't we, going into it? And I guess you look at things like, all the chat about the group of death, and you kind of looked at that and you went, yeah, unlucky Wales. and as it turns out, it wasn't unlucky Wales. It was
that pains me still.
Backfired slightly, but you and I, we were there. We were at that game. We had it. We were controlling it. It was ours for the taking, and things just went wrong. But we're not here to dwell on that. We're here to look at what happened afterwards. So following that exit, Eddie Jones gets announced as the new England coach, first international coach to look after the England team. You and I talked about this when all the media coverage was suggesting he was a possibility, and he was an exciting option. We were quite looking forward to him being announced as the new man, if that was the way it was going to go, as it did.
Yeah, I mean, I am one of those who I think historically has said I want the England head coach to be English, but actually, with hindsight, I think I'm wrong there. I think in this day and age, you want the best coach. And I know Eddie Jones at the time, to me, was the outstanding candidate. And I still believe we're very lucky to have got him.
Yeah, well, he's certainly got a pretty strong CV. And, of course, we'll go into more detail on that when we cover Eddie and our player profile. I mean, he's not a player, obviously, but he gets a mention there too. So he'll have a player profile at some point when we can go into a bit more detail and look at his career. But he didn't hang about. He made some pretty big calls early on, didn't he? I think it was 9 of Stuart Lancaster's squad members were dropped almost instantly. So that was Kieran Brooks and David Wilson up front, Rob Webber, Tom Youngs, Jeff Parling, Ben Morgan, Richard Wigglesworth, Brad Barrett, and Alex Goode, although he did manage to survive a year under Eddie Jones before he got the chop just before this year's Six Nations. But some significant changes based on the guys that were fixtures under Stuart Lancaster.
Yeah, they were significant changes. I mean, change was definitely needed. Something that worth looking into is the fact that just because they're dropped now, the door's not necessarily shut. I mean, Tom Wood, perfect example. Eddie Jones had some fairly harsh comments about what he thought about Tom Wood, but Tom Wood's proven himself, and Eddie Jones has shown that he's willing to give people a chance if they prove themselves. With the exception, looking at that list, with the exception of Jeff Parling, I would be surprised if any of the others do feature again under Eddie Jones. So I must say, I don't think any of them have been hugely controversial losses. And I think the people that have come in place have acquitted themselves well enough to earn that place.
Yeah, well, I mean, what about someone like an Alex Good? I think he was Premiership Player of the Season 2016. And then obviously got the boot just coming into this Six Nations now. So to possibly see him maybe go to Argentina.
He could potentially be an Argentina option. I think like you said with Alex Good, he was given the chance. I don't know the reasons for Alex Good being left out, but I would also imagine that although he might do Argentina, he won't be long term. I mean, Alex Good is probably coming towards the latter part of his career, and I think Eddie Jones will probably be looking at who are the young fellas coming through, depending very much on who goes on a Lions tour. But perhaps if a Watson or a Daly is unfortunate enough not to make the Lions tour, maybe he'd be looking to try them at fullback and see those options. But Alex Good might go, but I think that would be a sort of patch over rather than looking for a long-term future.
Yeah, no, that's probably true. And as you mentioned, Eddie Jones clearly has a bit of an eye for bringing young talent through. Although he hasn't brought a huge number into the main England setup as of yet, he's clearly got his eye on them. I mean, the England under-20s have won 2 of the last 3 World Cups. So, it certainly bodes well for the future of England and what the talent that is coming through. And as we know, Maro Itoje came through that route, a relative unknown to most supporters, most fans before he was involved, certainly under the Stuart Lancaster regime, but been an absolute England stalwart since he came on board and an essential part of the team now.
Yeah, I don't think you could have found a better example there, to be honest. But yeah, that's a really good point. Eddie Jones will bring through that young talent if he believes they've got what it takes, and mentally and physically, and Maro certainly has proven that.
Yeah.
And the other interesting point that we need to look at, it wasn't just for player perspective. I mean, from a staff perspective, sort of a backroom staff. I mean, we know Eddie Jones did say the coaching staff of sort of Andy Farrell, Graham Rowntree and Mike Catt would be given the opportunity to apply for their jobs again. I think that's probably a bit of BS.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. He clearly, I mean, Steve Borthwick, who's one of those replacements, worked with him on the Japan side, didn't he? He was a key part of the Japanese scrummaging. He was always bringing him along. That was touted right from the start. And of course, there's not room for multiples. So you kind of always felt that certainly Graham Rowntree's job was not there for the taking.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Ball, yeah, they've been, like you said, they were together at Japan, they were together at Saracens as well. So that was predefined. And I think we've also got to look, like Eddie Jones was saying, no chance to sort of reapply for their job should they want to play the way he wants to. Well, no one's going to sort of listen to the RFU appointed head coach and then say, no, I think we'll still play our way. We don't want to listen to your way. So it was realistically predefined, and I don't think those 3 had any chance of staying unless they'd done something particularly exceptional.
I think it's probably right as well. If you're gonna change things up, you need to really change things up. And in fairness, Andy Farrell, to his credit, has gone and done incredible things with Ireland. Graham Rowntree is about to head off on Lions duty, as is Andy Farrell. Mike Catt is now with Italy, doing things over there. So this is probably opened doors for them elsewhere. And they were all relatively new. Well, certainly Farrell and Catt were relatively new to the coaching scene. So it's a good experience, and who knows? Maybe we'll see them again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a slight on them as coaches or as characters. It was just necessary to make that change, to sort of reinvent the England side under how Eddie Jones wants it to look.
Yeah. So the other interesting one, which I only actually discovered the other day, and I think he actually only made the appointment at the end of last year, but Richard Hill is the England team manager. I wasn't aware of that. Did you know about that?
So when you mentioned it to me the other day, I had heard about it before. It slipped my mind because I remember, I think it was Will Greenwood actually doing a piece, I can't remember if it was on sort of Sky Sports or something about that. But I like the sound of that role. I like what he offers. I mean, Richard Hill is an absolute sort of legend of England rugby, and I'm sure whilst we don't know exactly the sort of remit of his role, I'm sure he definitely adds huge value. And it's something we also sort of need to look at. Like the likes of Johnny Wilkinson have been involved from a coaching perspective. Eddie Jones wants to keep that connection with England of old. He wants to keep that connection, with a hugely successful England team, a World Cup winning England team.
Well, that's the key thing, isn't it? It's guys that have been there and done what he's trying to do with this new setup. I guess to be able to sort of say, look, here is a group of people that have gone and done what you're trying to achieve. Learn from them, gain experience from them, ask them questions, let them sort of support you along the road.
And that's a good mentality, because Eddie Jones has made no bones about what his agenda is, and that's to win the 2019 World Cup. And to do that, he's willing to use all the resources at his disposal to do it. And I for one, am a big fan of that.
Yeah, well, it's clearly what makes a good head coach, isn't it? Someone who's willing to look at all the options available to him and take full advantage of it. So let's kind of move on to how this England team has performed, because of course the next big thing he did was he changed up the captaincy. He demoted Chris Robshaw. And he promoted Dylan Hartley, which was massively controversial at the time. You and I both spoke about it at the time and both said, actually, we really liked that. We felt like there was something a bit exciting about having someone like a Dylan Hartley coming into the fold in a position of responsibility like that. And that's what he did.
It was a real statement as to the sort of manner in which Eddie Jones wanted his England team to play, that sort of confrontational, never back down, on the edge style. And it's worked out well. It has worked out well. And it was, any way you look at it, it was a risk, because Dylan Hartley has got a really poor disciplinary record. He's managed to curtail it somewhat, and with age, he does seem to add that maturity. But it was a huge statement, and it was an exciting statement at the time. I don't think anyone would have predicted that before Eddie Jones' appointment.
No, and I think actually I recall you and I having a conversation post World Cup, and really I guess before all of this was officially announced, and before perhaps even that Dylan Hartley was on the scene. And we both said that actually we would have been okay with keeping Robshaw on and keeping Lancaster on. But it makes so much sense in hindsight. And of course, for Chris Robshaw, he wasn't dropped from the side. He was the captaincy was taken away, but he was told, you have the talent, prove that you still have it, and there is a position for you. And of course, he's another one that's massively important for this England side and has been hugely missed in this year's Six Nations.
Yeah, Chris Robshaw's really stood up to the plate. And what I like as well is Eddie Jones has been so quick to back him. I think Eddie Jones said he's been probably the most important player. I think he said in that perfect year that Chris Robshaw was his outstanding player. Removing the shackles from Robshaw, he seems to have added another level to his game. Maybe been a bit unfair there, because even when he was captain, he always put in a shift. He always played really well, but it was slightly sort of undermined perhaps sometimes when some decisions were made that not everyone agreed with. But without that, we've actually seen real value out of having Chris Robshaw as part of the team. And like you say, it has been noticeable, this Six Nations, without him.
Yeah. I mean, he's always been a workhorse, hasn't he? And often players like Chris Robshaw go slightly unnoticed but actually they do a huge amount kind of behind the scenes. So as fans watching from the sidelines, often we don't see these guys and think, wow, they were amazing. But with all the technology that exists today, to be able to really look at what all the players are doing on the pitch, it's quite clear that he does a huge amount for this England side. And it showed, not just obviously from him, but the whole squad. And if we look at their 2016 record, they opened their account with a Six Nations Grand Slam, first in 13 years, which is obviously awesome. That's always what you want to see. The last guys to do that ultimately went on to win the World Cup. So a pretty good start. They followed that up. They didn't. I think there was a lot of chat from the Southern Hemisphere following that. And actually, Graham Henry said that the England's success in the Six Nations didn't concern him or the All Blacks, and that the real test would come when they went to Australia in the summer, which as we know was another fantastic result, because it was a 3-0 whitewash in Australia. We've never won a series in Australia, let alone whitewashed them, and I think the last time they were whitewashed was in about 1973 by the Springboks. That was a phenomenal result.
That really showed the England team sort of where it is. It went down. I'm pretty sure it was the second test. The defensive effort was just unbelievable, really. I remember watching that just thinking, Jesus, guys, how are you still standing with the amount of hits you've been putting in? And I think it was a real statement from this England team, this England rugby. And actually, as we know, following this Six Nations, Graham Henry is now, recognising England as a huge force in world rugby. Because that 3-0 series win was obviously backed up with the 4-0 Autumn International. Fair enough, that's not as tough an ask, but we still needed to beat Australia and South Africa within those Autumn Internationals, and it was a great end to a perfect start for Eddie Jones.
Well, the South Africa game you just mentioned there, that was the first win in 10 years, I think. So although South Africa haven't been particularly strong in the last few years, it's always, the added pressure of things like that is where you often see teams sort of step up on the day. So they put them to bed. As you say, we beat Australia. That was a fourth win in as many months against Australia. So you're certainly answering critics when you're doing things like that. And I think Graham Henry had no choice but to come out and say, actually, credit to England. They clearly are a force in world rugby.
Yeah, and beating Australia sort of 4 times in as many months was absolutely joyful. I was actually at that Australia game with my then Australian girlfriend, so it just made it that bit sweeter.
Nice.
But,
yeah, absolutely.
We beat Australia, and that made it 4-0 that year, end to a perfect year. So that was a particularly happy day for me, I must say.
Good. That's, as you say, so an unbeaten year brings us to 2017 and the Six Nations Championships. History making a real possibility, a lot of hype, but the potential for a double Grand Slam, first time it's been done in the sort of Six Nations era. An opportunity, if they do the Grand Slam, to have the most consecutive wins ever. I think the All Blacks were 18 straight wins, and the Grand Slam would have been 19 straight wins for England. So big opportunity there. They opened their account against France. Wasn't particularly pretty, was it? But
no, it wasn't pretty. But first game of the Six Nations, a much improved French team. We did the job. We left it later than we'd like to, with sort of Tio coming on and scoring the try. But yeah, we did the job. Won ugly, but that win ugly is fine, especially in Six Nations, which is incredibly competitive these days.
That's it. So yeah, a win's a win, isn't it? And with the new bonus point system in place, obviously no bonus point there, but 4 points for the win. They then moved on. They went to Wales. Quite a different game. Definitely an improvement from England, but a massive improvement from Wales. So they put up much more of a fight. So that was an interesting one, because actually Wales had an opportunity to win that game. And yet you never really felt like England were out of it. Even, I think, with about 5 minutes left on the clock, we were behind. And it's still, for some reason, it didn't feel like it was over.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That's exactly the same. I wasn't. Obviously, as time goes on, you're getting slightly more concerned. But I'm with you. I always felt that England had enough to win that match. Wales really stepped up to the plate that day, as they always do when they play England, especially when they're in Cardiff. But it was just perfect execution under pressure, and that really, to me, sort of highlighted this England team, just a change for calmness. If you compare that to the World Cup, which we were talking about, where under pressure, rather than take probably what had been the smart option in the 3 points, felt like we might have panicked a bit, lost the line out, whereas this team, just a perfectly executed try with sort of Ford, Farrell and Daly. And that to me was sort of fairly symbolic of how we've moved on under Eddie Jones.
Yeah, no, I agree. And obviously, more importantly, it was a second win. It was another 4 points. I think at this point we were sitting top of the table or joint top of the table, so we're on 8. So, a perfect start. Moved on to Italy. They were the next game. They came to Twickenham. This was a weird one. I think Italy had been under a huge amount of pressure in the media. People saying they weren't good enough to be in the Six Nations. They needed to be dropped. Georgia should be given an opportunity instead of them. Lots of questions being asked, and they needed to do something, and they did.
Yeah, they did something. I mean, this game still bugs me a bit because, fine, Italy came, they had a plan to do something, but they've also got to be realistic. We still won with a bonus point. And yes, fine, the score, we might have run in sort of more tries had they not played that way. The score might have been bigger, but I don't really know what they achieved out of doing that. I think, yes, it was smart to an extent, but actually, this is obviously just for me, but it kind of put a dampener on rugby as a whole. I mean, no one. I'd have been furious if I'd bought that ticket because, as Eddie Jones said, it wasn't a game of rugby. It's not what you want to see. And I don't think it's something we will see again. But fair play to Italy for trying something new, I guess.
Well, that's it. They were trying to minimise the impact. And I guess England were the team that were likely to do the most damage if they played, the same old rugby. So, as you say, credit to them for trying something. It wasn't enough. England, third win with a bonus point, 13 points, moving on to Scotland. This was obviously a massively important one for England. They'd had 2 mediocre games. They'd had the Italy game that was a bit of a farce. This was a team that was touted as being one of the best teams in the world, or it is one of the best teams in the world, but they needed to prove it, and they had critics to answer. And so, nothing less than a kind of perfect performance would do here. There was also a huge amount of chat about how strong Scotland were. Huge improvements from Scotland meant that they were going to put England under a massive amount of pressure. And I think at one point Scotland were even the favourites, despite it being at Twickenham, which was obviously crazy because Scotland were always going to lose that game, in my opinion.
I'm impressed you haven't mentioned the sort of elephant in the room here because
I wanted you to have the opportunity.
Well, I will clarify for everyone. So I was over at Andy's to watch the game, and before the game, Andy was saying, "Do you know what? I just think we'll win by a bonus point. I think we'll dominate them." I was like, to be honest, you're talking rubbish, mate. It'll be a close game. Yes, I fancy us for a win, but I think it'll be 4 or 5 points. And I literally couldn't have been more wrong. And yeah, good for you. Good for you.
Well, they equalled their previous points difference record, so 40 points, a 40-point win. They put a new record number of points on Scotland with 61. I mean, it was just awesome, wasn't it? I mean, it was fast paced. It was perfect execution. Yes, Scotland made mistakes and the injuries didn't help them to certain key players. But England just dominated them and shut them out of that game in about the first 10 minutes.
It was clinical. It was absolutely clinical. You could see, I felt a bit sorry for the Scots. You could see the frustration that had happened from the sort of Italy game. And yeah, England were clinical. JJ just absolutely tore open their midfield. And like you say, within sort of 10, 15 minutes, we'd won that game. And it was just, I think a sort of bad day out for the old enemy.
Yeah, well, so that then took us to Dublin for the Ireland game.
Yeah.
You know, this was it. This was the history-making game. This was the opportunity to get that double Grand Slam, the opportunity to get the most consecutive wins. We should probably note that obviously the win against Scotland equalled that record. So we equalled the All Blacks on 18 straight wins. It also won us the Six Nations, so that put that to bed. England were Six Nations champions off the back of that game. So coming to Ireland looking for more records, and it just was, I mean, you know, the weather wasn't great, so it meant that there was less opportunity for some of the more running rugby, but that's no excuse because, you know, rugby is a game that's played in all conditions.
Despite Wales trying to stop that by shutting the roof as often as they can. But...
Yeah, well, exactly. But although I think they did that against Scotland, or Ireland, I can't remember which, and I think the pitch was waterlogged because they'd overwatered it, so doesn't always work. But yeah, Ireland, it was just I don't know, you don't know what was going through their heads at the time, but it just seems to me like perhaps it was too much pressure. You know, it was a close game. It was only a 4-point margin, but it was, as I say, in Dublin, which is always tough against a side that knows how to kind of stop giants in their tracks. They did it to the Kiwis at 18 when they were on their 18-game win streak, and unfortunately they did it to England too.
Yeah, it was really disappointing for me, and this was the slip up under the Eddie Jones era, and I don't just mean from a loss perspective. There's been a lot of talk about how we can learn from the loss. My personal view is we would have learned a lot more from the win. If we'd won that game going into a World Cup, sure, we've still got time to have these sort of games, but going into a World Cup, you know you've won a game under that much pressure, away with, you know, a second Grand Slam on the table, with a world record on the table. It would have probably, in my mind, given the players the confidence that under the harshest conditions, under the most pressure, we can win. But unfortunately, we fell short. Hopefully, that'll be something that we'll be able to rectify in future. But it was disappointing. That's taking nothing away from Ireland. They deserved the win. They did deserve the win that day.
They were clinical. You know, It wasn't exciting rugby, but they played the conditions that were in front of them, and they did it well. And they prevented England from scoring points, and that's what you need to do in the situations like that. So yeah, as you say, credit to Ireland. But yeah, so sadly that brought an end to the win streak. But still, you don't want to take anything away from England. They equalled the world record. You know, that's not a bad 14 months for Eddie Jones.
It's a hell of a start, isn't it? It's a hell of a start to his reign as the England manager, and yeah, you can't ask for more. It's exciting. It'll be really interesting to see what happens next. I love the fact it's a Lions year, not purely just because I love the Lions, but because I'm excited to see the sort of team we're going to take to Argentina, who will be the ones filling in the gaps when inevitably quite a reasonable sized contingent from the England lot will be going on that Lions tour.
Yeah, absolutely. And given what we've seen from Eddie Jones in the past with the blooding of young players, it'll be really interesting to see whether he goes with tried and tested but on the fringes, or whether he goes with, you know, some real kind of unknowns because he thinks he's seen something in them, because that seems to have been what happened with Maro Itoje, and as we talked about, you know, that was a hell of a call.
Yeah, and there's some real exciting youngsters out there at the moment. Actually, if you look at the likes of Malander at Northampton, Zach Mercer at Bath, maybe it is a bit too soon for them. I have no idea, but I hope to see some, you know, some young lads coming through on that tour, but we'll wait and see. I mean, I know our next episode will be looking at who we believe our Lions team will be. depending how close we are, we'll hopefully give an indication as to perhaps who the fill-ins will be for that England's tour to Argentina.
Absolutely, and of course we'll, when that time comes, when the Argentina tour squad is announced, we'll of course have an episode where we talk about them. But I think, as you say, before that happens, we've obviously got our Lions predictions next week, and I think a few weeks after that, the official announcement will be made, so we can then follow that up by comparing what we suspected with what the realities are. But so good first episode. Thanks, guys, for listening. Please do come back and join us next week and in the future, and we shall see you then. Take care.
Excellent. Thanks very much.